Okay, hello. I am Jerry Cooney, and this is my Canvas page for my class. Most of what we do, most of the assignments that we do, are either directly through Canvas or are partially described in Canvas. I wanted you to see what my Canvas page looks like and some of the things that my students experience as they use the Canvas page in my class. This was not something that I felt I could easily download as a PDF and attach to my application. So I hope it is okay that I'm doing this way. But I think this will give you a better idea of some of the things that we do. We use a lot of technology in my class in order to present the language to the students in ways that they can see and hear and write and so on. So that's not just a bunch of worksheets, although we do obviously do some worksheets sometimes. But I also want to use the technology available to us through Canvas to present the language to them in different and more interesting ways and more helpful ways. So one of the things that I wanted to show you was a recent test that we took. We took this one on March 12th. Well, first of all, let me go back just a little bit. I want to show you how my class is set up. Every day when my students come in, they have their lesson plan. The current day's lesson plan is right there at the top. So if you want to see what my lesson plans look like, they all pretty much look like this. There'll almost always be an opening activity and then information on what we're doing. Links will take them to certain graded assignments. Sometimes we have a grammar video to watch. And then if there is a worksheet that we have to do, then it is presented as a PDF on Canvas, but then I usually do give them a photocopy so they can fill it out by hand. I still haven't really got to the point where I feel like filling out worksheets online is nearly as helpful as it is to just do it on paper. But then we have a participation assignment down here. We have an activity they're supposed to work on Thursday morning. I have information about tests and quizzes over here on the right. And all of my lesson plans look like this. They're all set up this exact same way so that they can be very used to the format and so that they know exactly what to expect when they come into the classroom. And then they can click, I have the calendar for the whole year on here, and they can click on any date, any previous date or the current date and see what we have done in class. Future dates aren't open to the students yet. I open them each morning as I come in. So we're going to click on March 12th, which is when they took a test. And I know I might be speaking a little quickly. I'm trying to keep this from being a very, very long video. So this test, like most of my tests really, are both paper and online. So there's kind of two components to it. This allows me to give them listening and video activities as well as written activities. So this test was testing their ability to use the imperfect tense, indirect object pronouns with indirect objects, especially in the third person with les and les, and their ability to understand the written word, which we see in this reading activity here. A real basic grammar concept of conjugating irregular imperfects, and we had some bonus. Online then, what we had was, if we click on it, what went with it, we had a listening activity where they listened to different sentences that described either Lola, the well-behaved child, or Lulu, who was not a well-behaved child. And the sentences are all in the imperfect, and they are describing what kind of kids they were. And so you listen to the sentence and you decide, was that Lola, or was it Lulu, or was it both? Las dos. And that gave them the opportunity to not focus merely on the vocabulary, but also on the grammar, because they had to hear the third-person plural verb ending, as well as the vocab that they were saying, to hear that this was something that applied to both of them, not just one or the other. And then this was a much more complicated listening activity where they listened to, I think it was 5 different people speaking speaking about their youth, what a favorite toy that they had and who gave it to them and how old they were when they got this toy and some other interesting thing about themselves. And so they heard a lot of imperfect tense, tenía, era, whatever. They heard indirect objects because their toy was an indirect or was a direct object that was given to them by the subject of the sentence, and then the speaker himself or herself was the indirect object. So they heard that kind of stuff in the sentences, and then they had to pick what these different people said about these things. The writing section, I won't go over all of it in a lot of detail other than they had to write sentences in the imperfect that use indirect object pronouns, and then when they used the third person indirect object pronouns, they had to also include an indirect object as well after a personal ah. And so you can see the instructions that I gave them here, and then they had to write their sentence here. They had a lot of options to choose which words they used. They did not end up using all of the words, just a few of them, of the verbs and the different direct objects. And so on. And so they would create their own sentences that they wanted to create as long as they used all of the subjects and all the indirect objects, and then they would translate those sentences for me, demonstrating that they understood not just the vocabulary of what they said, but the grammar as well. They had to correctly translate their sentence into the imperfect tense or the English equivalent of the imperfect tense. My grandparents used to give me money, something along those lines. And then we had the reading section, which I believe I showed you quickly, and then the grammar section. The grammar section was simply conjugating the three irregular imperfect verbs. And then the bonus section was interesting. I thought it worked out pretty well. I believe in my personal statement I described that we've been focusing on learning a lot of different body parts, body functions, vocabulary this year. And so the bonus on this was hearing, and these are AI-generated characters, but they speak Spanish pretty well, and it was hearing them use some of that vocab. They were describing something that happened to them recently or whatever, using some of this body part vocab, and they were showing that they have been staying on top of this vocab, and could they still understand it when it was being used. So I will try to play one. I don't know how well it'll come through through the microphone, but we'll give it a try.
Ella estornudaba en clase hoy y no pudo dejar de estornudar.
It's probably really quiet, I can't tell, but I could hear it really well, but my speaker's a good 8 feet away. So it was poor Yaisa. She was yawning, and I'm sorry, she was sneezing. Yawning was a different one. She was sneezing in class today and wasn't able to stop sneezing. And sneezing was the vocab word that they had been focusing on. So how much of that they were able to summarize into English to show me that they understood what it was that was being said. And there were several of them. I have 7 different characters here, and they were randomly assigned one, so they didn't know who or what they were going to get. So that's one example of something that we do. Another, we do a lot of communication activities where the kids speak to each other. We do participation activities where they either will speak out in class, or that usually happens on Thursdays, or they have to do a participation video where they answer questions and upload a video of themselves responding to that question, so we can see this here. Most of my students, they have participation grade every single week, and most of my students earn their participation grade live in class. They will speak in Spanish while the rest of the class is listening. They don't come into the front or anything. They speak from the desk, but they do have to speak a few lines in Spanish, and I help them to pronounce things correctly or work on whatever they need to work on to help them with their pronunciation. And if students aren't here that day or simply don't want to earn their points that way, they do have the option of recording a video that comes to me through Canvas, answering these questions in Spanish in the video. Very few of my students opt for this, and most of them are fine just speaking in class. But I have a few students who have significant issues with speaking out loud in front of their peers, especially when it's something that's for a grade. And so while it's not that they never do that, I do force them to speak in Spanish, but this recurring regular assignment, this week after week after week, I do give them the option of doing it as a video if they want to. They speak in Spanish almost every day. In different communication activities or with recitation or whatever it is that we do. But this is one way of assuring that I get to every single student. One of the things that Ivy Tech wants to make sure that we do is communicate with every single student, to one-on-one in some way reach every single student as often as possible. And so this forces me to make sure that I don't let any student get through a week in my class without interacting with me. There are lots of other opportunities for the students to interact with each other and with me, but it's easy for certain kids to fall through the cracks. And so this makes sure that nobody falls through the cracks. You can't go a week in my class without interacting with me in some way. And also, obviously, it helps them work on their pronunciation of Spanish and reading Spanish out loud and all these kinds of things. So that's something that we do. I have most Wednesdays, they have a video activity that they do, which is where they watch a video story and then answer questions about it. I want to show one of those. This one focuses on the imperfect tense, and it's a story about Rogelio, a boy named Rogelio, and his tío abuelo, his great uncle Martin. and his aunt Lucila, and he is doing a school project, and he wants to know what life was like in Puerto Rico when Great Uncle Martin was a little boy. And so we hear a lot of imperfect tense. As Uncle Martin says, life was like this, and my house was like this, and my family was like this, and my brother and I used to do this, and those kinds of things. And so there's a lot of imperfect tense in here, which is really good for the students to hear. Whenever we do these video activities, I always have a previewing and a viewing activity. The previewing is usually worth just a handful of points because it's strictly just translating vocab words. The point of this isn't to translate vocab words. The point is that after they finish the previewing activity, they can see the answers. Hopefully they got them all right. And they're allowed to look them up. And now they have a vocab sheet, if you will, that they can use to help them, because these are words or phrases that show up in the video activity that they might not be familiar with yet. And so this helps them to be prepared. Okay, I'm going to hear, for example, grabadora, a recorder in the video. I'm going to hear la juventud, youth, barrio for neighborhood, and so on. So tío abuelo, which they're familiar with tío and they're familiar with abuelo, but they were not familiar with the two together. This is the first time they've seen those two together to mean your great uncle. And so when they finish with that activity, which just takes them a couple of minutes, now they have a vocab list of words with their definitions to use, and then they can jump into the video activity itself. And so they can watch the video, and they can even play around with the speed of it if they need to. They can slow it down, or I don't think anybody ever chooses to speed it up, but they can speed it up if they want to, which is good for them. I think it's good for them to focus on hearing the language at different speeds if that's what they need to do in order to get a better grasp of what's being said. So I'm just going to play a little bit. Again, I don't know if it's going to come through or not, but we'll give it a try.
Nuestra familia era grande. Éramos 8 en casa. Yo, mis 3 hermanos.
Okay, and so on. So he's describing what life was like as a kid, right? My family was big. There were 8 of us at home, my brothers and I, and so on. What I liked about this activity was I was also able to, rather than watch the video and read these questions and answer them, I had, these are fictional AI characters that they've been seeing for the past several months. I've been using these guys and girls in different activities. They're asking them the questions this time. And so now they not only have to understand the video itself and understand the question, the question's being asked to them by somebody their own age. Not a real person, but still somebody their own age. So I'll play this again. We'll see how well it comes through the speakers for you.
¿Qué hora es cuando Rogelio saluda a su tía Lucía?
So what time was it when Rogelio greets his Aunt Lucila? And of course, we have the different options there. But they have to show that they understand the question, right? And they can use the answers, the possible choices there, as context clues to help them to figure out what's being asked. But this was a really good activity that worked really well. And they did pretty well on it. I was pretty happy with how they did. Let me just pick a different, because we've got different characters here. Let's try this one.
¿Quién, además de Martín, vivía en la casa de Martín en aquellos días?
So who,
¿Quién, además de Martín, vivía?
Played it twice. Who other than Martin lived in Uncle Martin's house back in those days? And so, again, they have to figure out the question because these answers don't really give a whole lot of context. We know we've got family members there, but you really have to understand what she was asking in order to know which of those you should pick. So you've got to understand her use of the imperfect tense and then the vocabulary she was using. That's some of the stuff that I have. I can offer you more if you would like to see it. But like I said, I didn't want to just give you like some photocopies or some screenshots. What I can do is provide you with the name of my archived Canvas class from the fall semester, which would be Spanish 101 from Ivy Tech's point of view. And then if you want, you could, because I know the IU uses Canvas, you could import that if you would like and look at everything. I didn't want to just give that to you because I thought that might be overwhelming because it's 4.5 months worth of stuff, which is quite a bit of activities and information. But you could explore that if you would like to as well. So I'll make sure to provide that in the rest of my application.